Now we're moving on to another kingdom, the plants. Plants are surprisingly complicated and interesting organisms, so there's a lot we need to cover here. We're going to start by talking about their evolution, their nutrition, their diversity, and how different types of plants reproduce. Plants evolved from algae, which are photosynthetic aquatic protists. Over time, they adapted to living in drier and drier environments, became multicellular, and eventually became what we now know as plants. But adapting to life on land wasn't easy. There were some major challenges early plants had to tackle to move from an aquatic to a terrestrial habitat. Think about what it takes to move from an aquatic to terrestrial environment. What do you think the biggest challenges would be? If you need some hints, look at the characteristics of the terrestrial plant here compared to the aquatic plant. Pause the video and think about this for a minute. There are many challenges plants had to face moving onto land, but two of the major ones were getting enough water and preventing themselves from drying out, and also gravity. If you imagine a plant living in water, it's held up and supported by the water around it. Land plants had to develop new adaptations to support themselves in order to grow taller. If you haven't already, open up Participation Assignment 7. Pause this video and answer this question. There are 5 major characteristics of all plants. First of all, they are all multicellular. There are no unicellular plants. We talked already when we talked about fungus that plants have a cell wall, but instead of it being made of chitin like in fungi, the cell wall of plants is made of cellulose. Plants are also sessile, meaning they're rooted to whatever substrate they're growing in and can't move. Most plants are terrestrial, and aquatic plants can only live in shallow water because they need to be able to get enough sunlight for photosynthesis. So you won't find any plants growing in the deep depths of the ocean. And of course, plants are autotrophs, meaning they get their energy from sunlight through photosynthesis. Of course, there are plants all around us, but we only see a small part of their bodies and their lives. But just like with the fungi, there's a lot going on underground as well. For some plant species, there may be as much or even more biomass below ground as there is above ground. So plants are essentially living in 2 different environments at once, above ground and below ground, and they get different resources from each. The above ground portion of the plant, the part we're most familiar with, is known as the shoot system. And of course, the below ground part is the root system. The shoot system collects sunlight for photosynthesis. The leaves also take in carbon dioxide, which is also needed for photosynthesis. The root system collects water from the surrounding soil and also absorbs nutrients and serves as a place to store those nutrients. But another important function of the root system is to anchor the plant and provide it some structural support. So what do plants need to survive? Almost all plants need sunlight, which of course is necessary for photosynthesis. They also need water. They need certain mineral nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. And there are other salts and minerals that they also need to grow and protect themselves. But they can get their energy through photosynthesis, which we'll talk about in more detail later on. Photosynthesis is the process by which plants, and other autotrophs, like some protists and bacteria, use sunlight to convert water and carbon dioxide into energy. Because sunlight is used for photosynthesis, plants often want to maximize the amount of sunlight they can absorb. The larger the surface area of the leaves, the more sunlight they can capture. So larger, broader leaves capture more light energy than smaller, narrower leaves. And especially in places of dense, tall vegetation, like forests, plants are often in competition with each other for sunlight, with larger plants blocking out smaller plants. So many plants have evolved strategies to try and outcompete their neighbors. Firstly, of course, growing tall is a good strategy. If you can reach above the other plants, they can't block your sunlight. Having broad leaves is another strategy. The larger surface area absorbs more light and also shades out plants below. And some plants have evolved a sneaky way of getting up into the canopy, and that's vining. By climbing the other plants or structures around them, they can reach the sunlight up above without having to grow a large, sturdy trunk. Now, if we look at what resources the plant is getting from its below-ground environment, water is of course one of the most important resources. You may have noticed that water was mentioned in the definition of photosynthesis, and you'll see the role it plays when we talk about photosynthesis in more depth. But water also plays some other roles in the plant. For one, it helps cool the plant's tissues. It's also important for transporting nutrients around the plant, similar to how our blood transports nutrients around our bodies. But getting enough water and preventing water loss is one of the major challenges of being a land plant. Water can evaporate out of leaves, so land plants have a waxy layer called the cuticle that helps seal them to prevent water loss. On plants with a thick cuticle, you may notice that water forms beads or droplets as it is repelled by that waxy layer. In addition to water, the roots are important for absorbing nutrients that the plant needs. We mentioned nitrogen and phosphorus, but there are many other minerals and salts that are important for plant health. Nitrogen is necessary for plant growth. This is because it's used to build proteins. Phosphorus is important for energy storage. That's because it's used to make the molecule ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. We'll talk more about ATP when we get into photosynthesis, but it's an organic compound that stores and provides energy for cells in all living things. Now pause the video and answer this question. I'll pause again and answer this question. We haven't taken a deep dive into photosynthesis yet, but that is how most plants get their energy. However, some plants have found other strategies. Carnivorous plants still undergo photosynthesis, but they have another way of getting nutrients. Most carnivorous plants live in areas where there is not much nitrogen in the soil, but insects are a rich source of nitrogen. So they have adapted ways to trap and digest insects to supplement their nitrogen. A small number of plants are parasitic and take their nutrients from another organism, usually another plant. Because they don't undergo photosynthesis, they don't contain chlorophyll, which gives most plants their green color. So these plants are often white or brown.